Hey crafters, it's Alex Vanover and welcome back to my craft room. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use Waterslide decals and put them on epoxy tumblers. So let's get started. So the first step to creating a waterslide decal is choosing an image that's going to work well for waterslide. So I'm going to upload a new image and I'm going to show you guys the best way to do that. So remember that in order to do a print then cut project, which is what type of project this is, you need to make sure that you import your images as print then cut projects. So even if they were already in your design space, you may need to re-import them as print then cut images if you can't flatten them and figure out all that stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this as complex, but as you can see, I was able to find a PNG image of the Buffalo Trace Distillery logo. No worries, I'm definitely using this as a personal use project, but this is just a tumbler for my husband. So I was able to find it as a transparent PNG, which means that it already has a transparent background. If that is not the case, then you need to make sure that you use the eraser tool and you'll have to click in all the areas that have a background in order to delete them. But if you can find a PNG image already, I highly recommend using a PNG if you can have the transparent background. So then we'll click continue and see how this is like looking a little bit funky. We are going to use this as a print then cut image like this one on the left because waterslide decals are print then cut images. So we'll go ahead and keep that selected and then we'll click save. So then we'll click it and insert it into our project. And you can see that this is a great print then cut image because look how intricate this is. I'm going to cut it at 3 inches wide for the average 20-ounce tumbler. That's normally what I make everything, but look how tiny this design is. If I tried to cut this out of vinyl, there is no way that that would work. So that's one of those instances where print then cut, maybe we'll go up to 3.25 just to make the logo a little bigger. But that's one of those instances where print then cut images are really, really useful when vinyl has just reached its limits. Print then cut images are also perfect for like multicolored images, stuff like that. Anytime you're getting too intricate or too many layers than you would with vinyl, print then cut is the answer. So then we're going to click make it. And we're actually going to mirror our image. And that's because we're going to apply the water slide in a way that's going to make it a lot easier, but it does involve always mirroring the image. Especially you need to do that if there's text because the text will be backwards. If you have something like watercolor flowers where it doesn't really matter what direction it faces, then you don't necessarily need to worry about it. But I always mirror all of my images. So before I move on, I'm going to go back and fill up my page with extra things, just because whenever I do a print then cut project, I try to put as many pieces on the page as possible so that I don't waste any of my material. So when you see that come out the printer, don't be alarmed. Then you're going to click continue once all your images are ready. And the first thing that I'm going to do is click the send to printer button because I am going to use some special settings to make sure that I get a really, really good print from my printer. So I'm actually going to turn the bleed off because I'm not going to be cutting this image out with my Cricut. The thing about using transparent water slide is that I always cut the edges out with scissors. So I'm not going to be putting it back in my machine. And I'll show you why all that is afterwards. But in this case, it's one of the few reasons why I would turn off the bleed. Then when you go to use the system dialog, you are able to put some special settings onto your printer to make sure that you get a higher quality print than you normally would. So what I do for my printer is I go under preferences and I change my paper type because that helps it use a little bit more ink. I usually use the premium presentation paper matte, and that works really well for me. Now keep in mind, if you're not using an Epson Workforce Pro 3720, you might want to experiment with your settings and find something different because that's going to work differently with each printer. And I'm not really going to be able to help you with recommendations for that because this is the only printer that I have. So just keep that in mind. But like I said, whenever you're using specialty settings, make sure that you use the system dialog and Cricut Design Space to print then cut your image. So then I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to click print here in just a moment. So then I'm going to head over to my printer and I'll show you guys how to load up Waterslide paper and print it off.
So this is the brand of Waterslide paper that I use. I will link this in my Amazon store in case you guys want to try the same brand. And I am using the transparent/clear. So we'll talk about some different uses for white Waterslide when we get to the next step, but just know that in this case, I am using clear Waterslide. So let's talk about how to load this into your printer. It can be a little bit confusing because both sides of the Waterslide tend to look the same, and it's going to be really hard to capture on camera, but it's a little bit easier to tell in person. So you can tell the front side of the actual Waterslide because it does have a little bit of a sheen to it. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to show that to you guys on camera, but the back side definitely has like a papery texture. So when you load the Waterslide paper into your printer, make sure that the paper side is the back and that your Waterslide paper is on the front. Now, if you've never done this before, then I recommend taking a plain white sheet of paper and labeling, you know, like here's the front, top left, top right, you know, maybe label the back, and then send a test piece through the printer to figure out how you need to orient your paper when loading your printer. So if you haven't done that before, or if you haven't used your printer for print then cut, then I highly recommend doing that. So I'm going to load it into my paper tray, and I don't have any other paper in my printer. I don't recommend adding anything else in with your Waterslide because in case for some reason you try to print a second sheet by accident, you're going to end up with wasting a bunch of ink. So I only put the one sheet of Waterslide that I'm using in at a time, and I'm going to load it because I need to load mine paper side up. So when it goes around my rollers, it prints on the front side of my Waterslide. So after I load it into my printer and make sure it's lying flat, I can shut this, and then I'm gonna adjust my paper type. So the way that I do mine is I make mine premium matte because that just gets my printer to use a little bit more ink and makes a higher quality print. Then I'm gonna flip out the little paper catcher thing and click print. So after your printing is complete, your page will come out. Be careful not to touch the ink for the first few minutes because if you use a more pigmented printer setting, chances are the ink is going to be wet for the first few minutes after you pull it out of the printer. So the next step is to let your ink dry. So give it a few minutes to be completely set, and then I'm going to show you in the next step how to seal your Waterslide paper before you put it on your tumbler.
You want to do so with clear acrylic spray. I really like this Rust-Oleum brand clear gloss acrylic spray, but you can use any clear acrylic spray that you can find in the spray paint section anywhere that spray paint is sold. So when you go to do this process, make sure that you have good ventilation because this is basically spray paint. And you're going to want to do 3 coats of clear acrylic spray onto your decals before putting them on your tumblers. So you're going to do 1 coat, let it dry 30 minutes, do another coat, let it dry another 30 minutes, and then do a 3rd coat. And it's literally just a quick light coat, just like you'll see me do here. Super quick and easy. This just seals in the ink before putting the epoxy over top of it.
After you've sealed your entire sheet of Waterslide decals, then it's time to cut out the decals themselves. Now, since this is transparent Waterslide, I do not put my Waterslide back in my Cricut to cut it. I just cut it with scissors because you're not going to be able to see the edges. But before we move on, I do want to make a note of something. So on this particular decal, I'm going to be using a lighter wood grain cup, and this is a bit of a darker decal. So it's going to probably have a little bit of a faded look to it, but I do want to make sure that you guys understand that when you're choosing a tumbler to use for Waterslide, make sure that it's on the lighter side, especially for this transparent Waterslide, because even though it's colorful here on the sheet, when it gets behind another color, you're going to be able to see the texture through the decal. So make sure that you're using a lighter decal, or excuse me, make sure you're using a lighter tumbler, like glitter color or wood grain color, whatever you want to use. You can do anything you want. It just needs to be on the lighter side. But if you want to use a darker color, then you might want to think about using something like printable vinyl or even white Waterslide so that it's totally independent of the color of the tumbler. What I like about these is that because you can't see the edges, I don't have to worry about waiting for my Cricut to cut every single intricate little piece. I can just cut it in a circle and you'll never know where the edges are. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that that is going to work for you guys. I just want to make sure that when you're choosing the tumbler and your decal that you're making a choice that's going to look the best possible. So now I'm just going to cut my Buffalo Trace logo off of this sheet, and I'll leave the rest here since we're not going to use them for this project. And like I said, my cut is going to be really ugly, but that's perfectly okay because you're not going to be able to see it anyway. All right, so once you have your decal free from the rest of your sheet, then it's time to go ahead and soak it in the water. So I use an old Rubbermaid container that I used to take my lunch in, but since I seal this with clear acrylic sealer, I do not use a container that I'm gonna put food in the future. So I recommend taking like an old container from your lunch and using this exclusively for water slide. Then you want to fill it, I don't know, maybe an inch or so deep with water, and you want to make sure that it's as close to room temperature as possible. You don't want the water too hot and you don't want it too cold either. You want to get as close to neutral as you can, and you want to go ahead and soak your decal. So you're going to want to soak it for about 60 seconds. Make sure all of it stays underneath the water. It's okay if it curls up or does any of that. You just want to make sure that it stays fully submerged for about 60 seconds or so. So then I'm going to grab my tumbler and I'm going to go ahead and put some water on it in the area where I'm going to apply my Waterslide decal. Applying a Waterslide decal is a lot like applying a temporary tattoo. So if you just keep that process in mind, it's super easy. So after your tumbler is nice and wet, you want to make sure to secure it. So I like to use like a squeegee from 651 vinyl that I can just stick my tumbler right on top of just to keep it steady. And you'll know that your Waterslide decal is ready when you're able to slip the decal just a little bit off of the paper backing. Like I said, it's a lot like a temporary tattoo. So when you notice that that's ready, it's time to go ahead and apply your decal. So you want to pull it out of the water and you're going to actually flip it over so that the paper side is what is facing you. So after your cup, I always like to add a little bit extra water. I get paranoid that my cup is never wet enough. So you're going to have the paper side facing you and you're going to go ahead and position your decal. You can see the decal through the paper just fine, so that's really easy to do. And then when it's time to apply your decal, you're going to put some pressure on the decal to keep the decal in place while you remove the paper. So you're going to push down and then you're just going to remove your paper. And then you'll see that I have some wrinkles and some bubbles and stuff like that. So to get rid of those, I like to use a silicone brush. I like it because it's nice and gentle, so it's not gonna rip my decal, but it's also gonna do a really good job of pushing out any bubbles or any wrinkles or water underneath your decal. So the next step is to just remove those things, the water, the bubbles, and any wrinkles from underneath your decal. And once you epoxy, you won't be able to see any of those edges. So that's a really great benefit of the transparent water slide. I love using this stuff. So then you want to let your tumbler and the Waterslide decal completely set and dry. So that kind of varies about how long that takes, but it doesn't take a really long time. And then in order to seal the Waterslide on an epoxy tumbler, you do have to do a layer of epoxy over top of it. And I forgot to tell you guys that this is a wood grain tumbler, but it does have one layer of epoxy over top of the wood grain already. So I applied the Waterslide decal to a layer of hardened epoxy, and then I'm going to put another layer of epoxy over top my decal to make sure that it's totally set and it doesn't get damaged by use. And by the way, this is kind of semi-permanent, so you can't really manipulate the Waterslide decal after you've pushed the water out. When you're applying it, there's a little bit of wiggle room for movement, but once this thing is set on here, you pretty much have to keep it where it is. So make sure that you're happy with the placement. If you have any other questions about using Waterslide decals, make sure to drop them in the comments for me because you know that I'd be happy to answer them for you. And if we're not already connected on all the social networks, I would love to get to know you. So make sure that you connect with me on all the platforms that you're on. So I'll put all my social media handles right here on the screen, and they'll be linked in the description in case you want a clickable link to find them. And if you haven't already, please click right here to subscribe to DIY Alex. Scroll down just a little bit, and right next to the subscribe button, there's a little bell icon. Make sure you ring that bell and then select all notifications from the drop down so that every time I upload a new video, which is Fridays at 8 o'clock Eastern time, you never miss a new upload. I hope we can craft again soon.